Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, welcome. My name is Heather, and on this channel we like to walk a very fine line between a shopping addictive makeup monster and a responsible adult with a makeup hobby. Now, I really enjoy eyeshadow singles, duochromes, multi-chromes, blush, highlight, lip gloss, basically everything except pressed glitter, and today we're going to be doing my December palette ranking. However, I apparently recorded the audio but somehow misplaced the video for my August ranking, and so that was never posted. So I'm going to throw those palettes in here too, because very soon you're going to be seeing my 2023 palette ranking. So I want to make sure that all of the palettes are included. Alright, let's get into this. My August palette ranking only has 7 palettes in it, so this should be fairly quick. But the bottom end palette is this Whatever Girls palette. This is from Rom&nd, and it's part of their My Melody and Kuromi collection that they did, which I had to order from Korea, I believe, and it took forever to get here over the summer, but I was super excited when it finally did. Now, these palettes are definitely more like K-Beauty, so they're like soft wash of color. We're not getting this with these palettes, but I do think it's a very pretty palette, definitely very soft, very muted, but this shade right here in particular definitely gives me like Colourpop Super Shock kind of vibes. It's very like twinkly and sparkly. This one has a bit of a duochrome effect because it has some pink shimmers like kind of throughout it, and then you have one of the matte with shimmers, but everything else in here is matte. Do I think we needed all these mattes? No. Well, I guess this one is satin too, so there's a satin, but I skip over satins usually because they're kind of boring to me. But the mattes and this metallic I think played really well together, and you could make a nice soft kind of peachy pink look. All right, coming in at number 6 is the Glaminatrix Cosmetics You Beauty palette, and it looks like this. So pretty. Now, I almost didn't buy this palette, but then I kept seeing people using this shade here, G'day, and this shade, Whoop Whoop, yeah, Whoop Whoop, in looks, and I was like, dang, those are so pretty. And then I heard they were going to be retiring in this palette, so I figured it's now or never, so I did go ahead and pick it up. Now the mattes in here, I don't know, I don't feel like these mattes make sense with these metallics, but I do think the metallics in here are pretty enough to carry the palette through, and I'll use other mattes, that's no problem at all. But I do enjoy the metallics in this palette so much. This one practically glows when you use it, and this Flaming Gala is a multi-chrome going from pink to orange to green to gold to green, so very pretty shade there as well. And then you've got some really nice kind of duochrome shades in here, so it came up to number 6. Coming in at number 5, this one was kind of hard for me to place, and this palette, I was watching Rachel Palmieri's palette ranking video, and she mentioned this palette, and I was like, yeah, I tried that palette too. And then I looked at all my palette rankings and realized that it was nowhere to be found, and that it was from the Missing August archive. So this is thanks to Rachel that we even have these palettes included. But anyway, so I was having trouble ranking this one in particular because the mattes in here are so nice to work with. They make such a beautiful gradient, and I found myself throughout the month of August dipping back into those mattes many a time, even if I wasn't going into the shimmers here. The shimmers like this one and this one are more intense, a little bit more special, but some of these shades are very soft, very muted, so I just don't think that the duochrome formula that they're using is like super special. Now the last palette that I tried from Dose of Colors before this one was the Friendcation palette from Desi and Katie, and that was a long time ago. I'm thinking 2016, 2017, 2018 at the latest, so that's been a minute. And so I wanted to kind of retry the brand out. I really liked the way that this one looked, and that's why I ended up buying it. But I would say the metallic duochrome type formula in here in general falls short, but the mattes are what carry this palette up a little bit higher for me. Next up, coming in at number 4, this is the Heaven on Earth palette from Sydney Grace, and this is the light edition, and it looks like this. Now I did, at some point, I had a video demoing this palette out. I am not sure where that video is, so if I find it, I may be able to post it in the future. Otherwise, you're just gonna have to take my word for it. This is a really pretty palette. I like the sort of like gray undertone that they have to the greens that are in this palette. I like that we don't go too warm with any of the neutral shades that are in here, and then I really like the blues that they pulled out. The metallic blue and this like black, deep navy, almost black metallic, I think looks so pretty on the lids. And in general, I just think this is nice for very like soft, easy, blendable looks. Sydney Grace is not a brand that's going to give you these over-the-top, shimmery, metallic, like multiple finishes, glittery kind of vibe. They're going to give you really nice go-to workhorse shades. So if that's what you're looking for, or if you have more mature lids and you don't like to do super like glittery kind of looks, I would look at Sydney Grace's formula because it is very nice and very predictable in a good way. Like I know when I order a different color, it's going to be just as good as the color I tried last. It doesn't matter what color family it is. I know like purples are harder to formulate, whatever. No, with Sydney Grace, their palettes, their formulas are very consistent. All right, coming in at number 3 is the Gourmond Girls and Nightshade palette. Ugh, I love doing this whenever I play with this palette. And it looks like this. Now, they released another Halloween-ish palette too that was also like greens and purples with some yellows, and I couldn't see and experience the difference between that palette and this palette, which is why I only got the one. But the other one did look pretty. This one, personally, I quite like. I will say these two shades look very similar on the lids, so when you put them, like when you try to put them together, you don't really get any kind of like gradient effect. It just all looks the same, which was a bit disappointing. I think the mattes that they chose in here are quite nice. I like how you have this sort of gradient purple, and then you've got some pops of other colors that you can kind of blend out with that. This shade kind of falls flat for me, but I've noticed for all of the brands that do these kind of squishy duochrome formulas that that shade tends to be pretty flat in everybody's palettes. So I think it's the shade, which begs the question why everybody keeps putting it in their palettes, but whatever. So that one kind of fell flat for me, but everything else in here was very, very nice. Coming in at number 2 is the other half of the Whatever Girls collection from Rom&nd, and this is the Kuromi palette, and this is the one that ultimately like convinced me to buy the palettes in the first place because it was so cool toned and dark and smoky, and I love this like purpley blue mishmash metallic in here. It has some pink in it as well, and I can show you, don't mind the bruise on my hand, it's really gross, but I can show you the swatch of that. Like it's definitely this very like pearly twinkly kind of a finish, which I think is very pretty. Is that my like end all be all favorite formula? No, I like something with a little bit more opacity that's going to be super twinkly on my eyes. Obviously that's what I have on today. But I think this one in conjunction with some of my singles is a really special combination, and the mattes were what I was super interested in this palette. So for me, I was happy to get this palette just to give me that like soft, kind of dusty goth kind of a vibe, and then I can use my singles for the metallics. And then coming in at number 1 for August was this palette. This is the Hershey's Cookies and Cream palette. And it looks like this. Now you can see I've like dug my grubby fingers into the metallics in this palette because I've used this palette a ton. Even outside of August, I was still using this palette because I thought it was so nice. The mattes in here, even though you do have like this kind of mustardy shade and this red, I think they blend really nicely with these sort of denim-y blue-gray shades. You've got a true gray and a black. I think they all go together so nicely. And I love that we have some sort of like champagne and bronzy type shades mixed then with the blues. I think that's all really pretty. And then this metallic black shade, every time I come into this palette, I end up using that shade because it is so pretty and sparkly, and it captures, like it reflects the light so beautifully. I have been nothing but impressed with this palette. There's not a dud shade in here. Because of that, which just knocked over all my December palettes. Because of that, it made it all the way up to number 1 for August. All right, let's turn our attention to December. So coming in at number 11 is this Coffee Talk palette from Simply Bella Beauty, and the reason I got this, it was a TJ Maxx special, but the reason that I got it is that it was both blushes, highlights, and an eyeshadow palette. Now I would say this is probably an older release because a lot of the shades in here are kind of dry. Like the highlighters in here are very, very dry, very sandy, and you can get some pigment up off of them, but they're just lacking a little bit. Not like a fave of mine. I really like the blushes in here. The blushes in here are what saved this palette. Otherwise, I wouldn't even be bothering with this palette. And then the metallics, or the eyeshadow part, I did have one fatality. When I got home and opened it up, I discovered that one shade had already been damaged. This was completely saran wrapped whenever I went to TJ Maxx, so I don't think anybody physically like broke it. I think it just maybe was dropped or something and broke. These marbly shades though are incredibly dry. I didn't even swatch some of these out because I swatched these two and they are super, super dry. There are some of these more like buttery appearing metallics that are pretty nice. And then the Petri dish shades, they are very wet and sticky and I am just not a fan. So for me, it came down to the bottom because really the only thing that I like in here are the blushes. So coming in at number 10 is the Nomad. This was their Christmas palette from last year, and it's a little 9-pan palette. Everybody kind of hated on this palette, so I didn't want to pick it up full price, but I did end up picking it up on one of their Black Friday sales, and I was happy to at least have it to sort of round out my Nomad collection. I agree, the metallics in here are pressed really hard, so I have to take like a densely packed brush and kind of dig at the pigment to pull some pigment up and then spray it to put it on my lids. That seems to be the way that I can get this to work. And you may be noticing some kind of like streaking across the palette. That's because my kiddos dunked their fingers into this palette. I'm not a fan of that. But in general, I thought the mattes were fine. It's just the metallics that are a little bit too hard pressed. All right, coming in at number 9 is the Colourpop Cloud N palette. Now this was a more recent acquisition, and I think the mattes in this palette are really, really pretty. Let me pull this back so we don't lose the light entirely. So I think the mattes in here are very pretty, but the metallics in these bigger pans, they just seem harder pressed and not as impressive when you like swatch them. Like they don't have as much like twinkliness as some of the older Colourpop formulas. They do now have this sort of glitter formula. The first time I used this palette, my eyes would not stop tearing all day, to the point where coworkers and patients were making comments about like, are you okay? And for that, I don't know if some of this glitter shade got into my eyes. I did not use that shade, but I don't know if there was some cross-contamination in the rest of the palette. But for me, that kind of put me off of this palette. I used it a second time and did not have the same issue. But again, like this shade is supposed to be like a pinky duochrome type shade, right? Like it's supposed to be a duochrome blue flip, but I just don't really see it. Like you have to work to kind of see it, and I feel like you shouldn't have to work that hard. So for me, this one came down to number 9 for that reason, but this packaging is super cute. All right, coming in at number 8 is this little e.l.f. palette. This I got free with one of my e.l.f. orders. This is the Perfect 10. I don't know, I think it's called like Winter or something. It was part of their winter release, I believe, last year, and I really wanted it for like these shades right here. I could care less about the neutrals. I wanted it for these shades. And these shades here, the blues and the silver, were worth the effort because they are like super buttery and they pick up so nicely. Let me show you. And I'm sorry, I'm swatching over my big ugly bruise, but you can see like they have a really nice light reflection to them. They're very metallic. I think they're a gorgeous formula. I would definitely be interested in trying more palettes from e.l.f. if they keep this same formula. And when you see them on the website, they just look more textured than some of the standard metallics in the palette. I mean, you can see, like these do not look the same as these. So if I see more palettes like that, I would definitely want to give those a try. All right, coming in at number 7 is Gourmond Girls Silent Night, and it looks like this. Now this particular palette I think is really pretty color story, but the mattes in here are a bit drier than what I expect from Gourmond Girls, and I do think there are some redundant shades in here. So for example, you have this shade and this shade which look almost identical on the lids. You have these 2 shades which look very similar on the lids. And then these 3 shades I think are far enough apart. If you only use 2 of them, you should be okay. But I think like especially if you try to use these 2, they're not going to look very different. This peach shade is quite stunning. It's a taupey kind of shade, but it has some kind of teal and pinky type shimmers in it, which I think makes it a little bit more special. The 2 blues in here, they do have slightly different shifts, but again, if you put them together on the eye look, they are not going to look very different. And so I think you sort of fall into that redundant trap a little bit. So for me, I think this is a good palette to pick up on sale, especially if you like this color story, but do you need to pay full price? I wouldn't. All right, next up, number 5 is the Kraken Cosmetics Dark Matter palette. Now, I have been eyeing up Kraken Cosmetics for probably 2 or 3 years, and I've never actually like taken the plunge to make a purchase. But this palette came out, they had a Black Friday sale, and I was like, don't mind if I do. So I did go ahead and pick this up. I think originally it's $40, but with the sale, it brought it down to $30. So that made it a little bit more reasonable for me to try. Now, I will say their mattes, very beautiful. They blend out very nicely, and I think they hold up well throughout the day. Their metallic formula is very beautiful. For example, this shade, this shade, this shade, they're very beautiful. They have a nice impact to them, but I don't think they hold up the way that I would want them to throughout the day. So let me see. Like, these are beautiful. These are beautiful shades. But throughout the day, the intensity just falls. And so I wish they were a little bit more vibrant all day long. Like, I wish they held that vibrancy all day long. In terms of price point, I do like the fact that they have kind of this cool art on the front and inside covers. The palette comes to you empty, and you put the pans in yourself. And they are labeled, so at least you know where to put stuff, but that is sort of a drawback. The one benefit to that, though, is that they have the holes on the back, so should you want to depot any of these and rearrange things, you absolutely can do that all by yourself. So I do like that they kind of gave some thought to that, although I wish it was sort of already assembled by the time I got it. With that said, it kind of falls to the middle of the road. I think the $30 price point is more fair than the $40 price point. I think that's a little steep for what you're getting here and how they last throughout the day, but I'd be curious to see, as their formulas continue to evolve, what the longevity of their shades looks like. I have the Trick or Treat Halloween palette from Oden's Eye and Angelica Nyqvist next, and it looks like this. Now, between the two palettes that she came out with for Halloween, this is the color story that I'm less obsessed with. So I knew already that it wasn't going to be my absolute favorite, but I thought the greens and the purples in here were really pretty. This kind of minty shade was very nice. And then I like that you had sort of this mustardy kind of warm tones. The orangey warm tones are not my vibe. So like, if we'd have just taken that out, I probably would have been 10 times happier with just skipping that row. But I really like this shade. I think it is a very soft kind of canary yellow duochrome type shade. I like this shade a lot. It reminds me of the Erd shade, or the Erd palette from Oden's Eye, but this shade is Crumble City. When I went to go put it on my eyes, it fell out everywhere, and I ended up having to redo my foundation. It just made a huge mess. So for that, it ranked a little bit lower. It's not my favorite color story, but I think overall the quality in general is still good enough that if you wanted it, pick it up. If it's still there, I don't know. All right, next, this is the Hey Reindeer palette. This is coming in at number 4, and it looks like this. Now, this is a beautiful color story. I really liked playing with this palette. The other half of the holiday palettes came in a little bit higher, but I did think this one was quite pretty. I love this really deep kind of smoky blue. I think this purple is quite nice, and even this Candy Canes is a multi-chrome, and I like how it's kind of this candy pink rather than like sort of a fuchsia that is more expected. I think that's quite nice as well. And then of course this Belle shade here is one of those metallic-y, gunmetal-y black shades. I'm always down for those. Coming in at number 3 is the Little Ghost palette. This is the other half of the Halloween palettes, and it looks like this. Now, again, the sort of red-orange row I could have completely left behind, and I would have been even happier with this. I think the blues, the purples, they blend so nicely together. I even kind of like this pop of yellow to contrast with the blue and purple. This Cobweb shade is a bit soft, it's a bit satiny. I wish it was a little bit more impressive, but otherwise I think this is a really pretty palette. I love the color story. The packaging for these I don't think I like as much as the original Hella palette. I think that one was a little bit like this is like the kitchen sink, right? Like there's everything on this palette. I think that one was a little bit more refined in comparison to this one, but I don't hate the packaging. All right, coming in at number 2 is the Snow Dream palette from Oden's Eye, and I had a hard time deciding between this one and what came in at number 1, but I ultimately put this one at number 2, just because there is, again, a bunch of kind of like the warmer neutrals that I kind of shy away from, but all these kind of minty, sagey greens, this pop of purple, the hollow chrome shade in here, I mean, those are very stunning, and I think the kind of soft pastel green looks that I did with this palette, I really, really enjoyed. I remade them several times, so that's why I wanted to bring this one up a little bit higher, because it was one I kept going back to. Quality is phenomenal, and I really do like the packaging on this one too. I think they did a good job with that packaging. All right, and then coming in at number 1 is a palette from a brand that I haven't played around with in quite some time, and that was the Give Me Glow Mystic Garden palette. And it looks like this. Now, there is a video up on my channel demoing out this palette, and I think I use every single shade in the palette in the video. So if you are interested in checking out this palette, that would be the video to look at. I think the mattes in here blend really nicely. You have really nice gradients for the mattes, and the metallics in here are also quite nice. I thought I was only going to really like this metallic because these two seemed so neutral and boring, but they actually have really nice dimensional shimmer and like twinkliness to them that I think is really quite nice. This one I thought was very beautiful in the lower third of my lash line. I thought that made that kind of like pop and give some brightness there. And then this one I mixed with this one on the lid, which I thought was quite nice as well. So overall, this one came in at number 1. Phenomenal packaging, great formulas. Couldn't ask for anything else. All right. And with that said, that is everything for this video. I want to thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe before you go, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.